it's impossible to talk about the Raven cycle existing without looking at the Scorpio races in the middle, which is my standalone when it's the most Maggie thing ever. What do you write after you write a series that lived on the bestseller list for a year? You can write anything you want. My game was, do I want to try and write something that will sell better? And I thought that's impossible. I want to write something that's for me. So I wrote this book that was about killer water horses that came out of the ocean on a small island in the North Sea. It's very heavily metaphorical. It's very much about the politics of this island, the kind of conflict between spirituality versus religion, traditionalism versus progressivism. And it was more characters that I'd ever put in a novel than ever before. I was a horse child. It's true. Not like a centaur, but I was a horse person. But we could not afford nice horses when I was young. My parents said you can have a horse, but the only horse you can have is if you raise the money yourself. So the only horse I could afford was a fresh, off the track, retired thoroughbred racehorse. And her choice was to be my best friend or to be a can of dog food. And she chose reluctantly to be my friend. So this concept of being a child and loving this horse very dearly that was probably going to kill you before you hit puberty, that was a very important core of this murder horse story. But most people don't care about horses, just like most people don't care about car racing. But I wanted to write a story where I could show the appeal of horses. So if you make the horses larger than life, if you make them dangerous, then people love them, not despite them being dangerous, but because it's exclusive, because you have to earn the ability to be safe around them. That's basically, it's the most true horse book I think I could possibly write, is this concept of these horses being larger than life and dangerous. And again, that appeal that I have of nature not being a villain, but it's not necessarily going to be your buddy either. And then as I was coming up with a location for it, I was thinking about this island. I really wanted to write something that was set on a remote Celtic island because of my historical background, and also my travels to these places. They have such interesting cultures because they're so isolated. And I remember I was just asking myself, why would they stay on this island if they're dangerous horses? And then I just thought, that's the stupidest question. I just answered it for you right there. They stay on the island because there's dangerous horses, right? There's the appeal of it. Why do we race cars knowing that it's dangerous? It's the appeal of thinking, not that you're cheating death, but through skill that you are cheating death. That's the ultimate human kind of folly, is that we think that we can make decisions to get out of like our mortality, right? And so in between those two things, yes, car racing and horses, that's the metaphor of the Scorpio races, that we love things because they're dangerous, but only if we think it's not chance. If there's no skill involved with riding the horses at the Scorpio races, I don't think it would feel the same way. It's the reason why when it came out, I remember that Scholastic said, we should pitch this like the Hunger Games. He said, no one who loved the Hunger Games is going to love the Scorpio races for the same reason. This is a really dusty literary book with baking and murder horses in it. I mean, it's not going to be, it's more like Days of Thunder than anything else, right? And because Hunger Games, it's chance. There's skill afterwards, but you're chosen completely by odds. No one goes and says, well, I guess there's the one district that goes and says, let's do it. But the appeal is in thinking, yes, I can have control. I would say that if you combine those two things, me able to take mythology and smash it into a relevant story for people who know nothing about that story, because no one knows anything about killer water horses. No one has read The Legend of Water Horses. And then being able to handle all of those characters that are existing in service of a big story. That was the prerequisite novel to be able to write the Raven cycle, which was then only able to be written because I pitched it as a series with bullet points for each one of those novels to know where I was going. Otherwise, it would have been very easy to get lost. A goal for this series was that when I was growing up reading fantasy, everything cool that could happen to you happened in a different country. There was no magic anywhere else. And that wasn't my experience of growing up all over. Wasn't my experience, certainly, of growing up in the mountains of Virginia. So one of my goals was, can I make people find that magic in Virginia? And I have to say, there's a certain dark pleasure to getting letters from readers who are in Britain and saying, nothing fun ever happens here. If only I was in Virginia. And I thought, this is what it looks like, the cycle of abuse. So one of the things that was satisfying was to use real places. So you can go on a road trip and find real places. And I like to think that they're places that when you get there, you go, I see what it is. It is actually, it's genuinely cool. So Blue Lily is full of a bunch of places that I haunted in real life that I put into that novel. And I think that was probably just a continued joy in every single book, that you never get tired of it. The thing about doing a finite series is that by book 3, you aren't tired of it. You're full of anticipation. You're about to get to where you're finally meant to get to. It's that big dramatic moment. So it's more like when you're a novelist and you've gone through the dreaded second act, and now you're like, there it is. The bit is in my teeth and I'm headed for it right now. So Blue Lily was, I would say, probably the most fun of them to write. Book 1 is the toughest. You're establishing all the rules. You have no idea if you can do this thing. It took me twice as long to write as any other novel. Book 2, I threw out the entire draft 1 month before the deadline because I looked at it and I thought, this is a novel, but it is not the novel I intended to write. So that was excruciating. And then book 3 was get to play with all of the rules that you've set up. You know where you're going. You're not far enough away from the end to get lost. So in many ways, Blue Lily is, even though it's a bridge book because you don't get to tie off a lot of things, quite satisfying to write. Strange as hell to get awards, by the way. To be a critical darling was not on any of my goals, any of my cards. Thank you, but also not on any of my cards. I really feel like commercial fiction should be written wonderfully. It should be absolutely amazing. It should be a harder job than literary fiction because not only are we being observational, but we must tell a cracking story. We have something that literary does not have to do, which is that we must have a ticking clock. We have to have propulsion, a reason for existence, and we are competing with things like television and real life. People who are reading literary are often reading because they're readers. They exist to enjoy that prose and the observation. A commercial book has to be spectacular. As far as connecting with readers, it was fascinating and challenging. I never really particularly thought of myself as being interested in fame or being known. And what's interesting about this is that, so I came of age as a creator, as the concept of what an author was changing. I used to think that all of my favorite authors were dead, right? I mean, did you know if your authors were dead or alive? Did you care particularly? Would you have read an interview with them? Would there be a video with Meet the Author? Would Jake be interviewing you about what your life was like? Would it matter? No, I mean, we would know about someone in the same sense that we would say, I have heard the Cranberries and I know that Sinead O'Connor once said something about the Pope. Like that's our level of connection, right? Of interpersonal. It would be so tied into brand. It wouldn't be really, does she live on a farm? You would never do that kind of thing. And so at the same time that people were starting to know more because the internet was coming to light, YA specifically was so tied in with YouTube culture, which meant that YA authors then became by accident influencers, where we became, I remember going to conferences and we would be on panels and it wouldn't be talking about your books. It would be playing games because you are a celebrity, right? You're a character that people understand something about you. So it's funny to watch you reply to a game show because they understand you as a character in your own story. So challenging, right? So it means that you're living in the public eye, as my goal was to always be an accurate version of myself, but it can't be complete. There's no way to present the totality of you to be presented on a game show. So that was challenging. And I don't know if it would be as challenging if it wasn't coming of age in YA in that same way, where I would have never chosen to be an influencer, that kind of thing. And then also books were starting to grow fandoms in the same way that televisions are growing fandoms. So television, you can't change. That was really the basis of fandom. So fandom can shout at like Supernatural about how unfair it is, but they don't really think that they're going to get the ears of the people who are creating those. But then they brought that fandom culture into book culture. And so I would have readers sitting in my front yard who were coming to talk to me about decisions I'd made for characters in these books. And I just thought, I did not sign up for this. So creating under those conditions is challenging. Bravely was a very fun game. I already told you that I love forgery. And so when Disney asked me if I would write the sequel to Brave, but in movie form, first of all, I said no. And they said, please. So first of all, Brave takes place where I studied in school. I was a 14th century history major, 14th century Scottish history major. And yeah, so to be asked to do this, I asked Disney, I said, is that the reason why you asked me? And they said, oh, we didn't know that. That's convenient. I thought, it is convenient. So what was interesting about Bravely is that it was very much like being a grandparent playing with kids. So it's not your job to put braces on them, to change them in any way. You're supposed to take them and make sure they do not get hurt. Maybe you can be enriching in some very small way, but then you hand them back to them. That's the goal of IP, right? Intellectual property. You know it going in. These are not your kids. You hand them back. So that sense of both it being a game, make it match the movie, and that sense of responsibility. Don't break someone else's children. And then a third thing on top of it, which is don't phone it in. I feel like it can be very easy if you're asked to, write something which is for a children's movie or for someone else's thing to not take it seriously, to not give it as much weight as you would give an original project. And I did not want to do that. So I actually had an idea for an original novel I've been kicking around for a very long time, this idea of a bargain with a god of ruin, which I like talking about this one after talking about all the Crooked Saints, because the metaphor is heavy in this one, where the idea of it is that Merida interrupts the god of ruin at his work. He has come to ruin her family. He is drawn to stagnation, and her family has just been phoning it in for a while. They've not been improving in any way. And his job is to come in and clear house so that other things can grow in their place. And so Merida makes a bargain with the goddess of renewal, and she has a year to duke it out with Feradoc, who is the god of ruin, and to prove to him that her family is changing. So she's trying to take every single one of them and make them change enough that they will not be ruined at the end of this year. But of course, you can't really change other people, and you can't predict how they will change. So she gets to have this family drama again, where she is trying to take her siblings and her parents and pull them out of the muck, and they all change in ways that are unexpected to her. But along the way, she also gets to learn that Feradoc has his reasons, that sometimes you do have to take a situation and just raise it to the ground so that something new and interesting and brand new can kind of take its place. So that whole balance between the god and the goddess had been floating in the back of my head for a while. And I thought, am I really going to give this to Merida? And then I thought, yes, because you're not going to give Merida just a stupid phoned in story. You're going to give her a big book. So that was Bravely, letting her play in my original playground and then getting to play with her. And she was, in her turn, she was actually quite an original character herself that meant quite a lot to the people who created her. So yeah, it was such a satisfying thing. And I have to say that I really was afraid of this idea of Disney fandom. I'd heard about all the fans could be quite intense, and having dealt with an intense fandom culture, I thought, I don't know if I wanted to be any more intense. And it was just lovely. It really was. I mean, it's been really fantastic. And it's been funny to watch people take copies of the book and have Merida in Disneyland pose with copies of the book. I feel a little bad for the Meridas out there who obviously had no idea it existed, and now they have to smile with it. Right now, the adult novel that I'm working on is very secret, so I can say nothing about it. However, I can say that the Raven Cycle is being adapted into a gorgeous graphic novel series with an artist and illustrator who was in the fandom before she went to university for illustration. So I've seen the script and the art for the first one, and it's going to be very pleasing to people who have both read it and not read it. So I can tantalize that